What's going on, guys? It's Ben. I'm going to start this video with a bit of an explanation, so if you want to get right into the video, I'll leave a timestamp in the description you can skip to. So firstly, I wanted to start by saying that I will hopefully have a face cam figured out for the next video. I didn't have time before this one, so it'll be similar to my previous one. Also, I wanted to talk quickly about why I chose Bobby Tarantino 2. Every week I'm going to be reviewing an album that the viewers vote on. Bobby Tarantino 2 was voted in for this week, but I'll leave a straw poll in the description so that way you can vote for the one for next week. And if I don't have an option for the album that you want to be reviewed, just comment it, and then each like will count as a vote. Thanks for helping out, and let's get into it. So just like before, we will be analyzing Logic's first studio album since the pile of hot garbage that was Everybody, with an overview, key takeaways, flow, lyricism, production, features, some highlights, some lowlights, the enjoyment factor, the concept, and finish it off with a conclusion. Let's get it. Let's get started with a quick overview. Bobby Tarantino 2 wasn't Logic's strongest work, but it was a step in the right direction from the disaster that was Everybody. We see Logic attempt to follow up his 2016 Bobby Tarantino mixtape, but it doesn't feel the same as the first one. There's something about Bobby Tarantino 2 that's just cringeworthy. Logic comes off as a man out of his time, trying to be too relatable and saying weird things like fam. Bitch, I've been blowing up. Bitch, I've been everyone's showing up. Where was you in the beginning? I know that it's showing up. Alright, next up is key takeaways. So the first key takeaway is that his name is Bobby, something that everybody should have known, but he decided to keep reminding us with ad-libs in his lyrics. He started smoking weed again, and this happened shortly or around the release of Everybody. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's been a little bit. Third key takeaway is that he makes a lot of money, but I mean, he doesn't flex or anything, but he does make a lot of money. He's married, not that that's lasting for long, and that he works hard because there is nothing like that young Sinatra work ethic. Pull up with that new in the driveway. So fresh, I double park that. All right, and next up is Flo. So Flo is one of Logic's better parts as a rapper, but the first half of the album finds him doing weird experiments with his voice and flow, almost singing, which is something that he should probably never try to do again. The second half of the album contained better flows and better bars. There wasn't as much goofiness. It was more like the first Bobby Tarantino, more like the mixtapes. Overall, Logic flowed well, but songs on Welcome to Forever and Under Pressure, along with all of his other albums, well, excluding Everybody, prove that he can do a lot better. So for Flo, we're going to give it a SkeenScore of 7 out of 10. Always on time 'cause my eyes is on my rodeo legs. I don't trust nobody or no. Next up is Lyricism. So the entire project seemed almost rushed, which is weird because he had nearly a year to create this project, but the urgency just kind of came through in his lyrics. He used recycled bars that the average listener wouldn't pick up on, which were many lyrics that were taken from the Young Sinatra mixtapes and his earlier albums. He bit bars from both Kanye West and Nas. Logic's never been the best lyricist, but he can do a lot better than what he gave on Bobby Tarantino 2, so overall his lyricism was very underwhelming. I understand that this album isn't supposed to be a lyrical masterpiece, but if somebody wanted to turn up, they don't care if Logic is married and works hard and doesn't flex. A listener wants to hear that Logic is getting girls, getting money, and flexes on everybody. So if he wanted to come with lyrical precision that highlights his peace, love, and positivity motto, that's fine, but he could have done a much better job with that. Weird bars saying like, is it really so hard to be a good person? That just doesn't work. Like, we get it, Logic. Peace, love, and positivity. That's not what we want to hear about on a Bobby Tarantino tape. And he continually mentioned his marriage and work ethic, which is again fine, but it just seemed repetitive and almost obnoxious. So for lyricism, we're going to give it a weak SkeenScore of 3 out of 10. Next up is production. Production was the highest point on the album. Six did a fantastic job with the production, as he always does. The more experimental beats worked really well, like Wizard of Oz being the prime example of this, along with 44 more. Heavy percussion and good melodies led to an extremely well done production. It worked great for an album full of bangers, if you will. So production is going to get a SkeenScore of 8 out of 10. Next up is features. So there were very few features on the album, but they all did a good job. If you don't count the terrible intro featuring Rick and Morty, Wiz Khalifa was the first feature on Indica Badu. He had a somewhat underwhelming verse that talked about smoking weed, something that Wiz always seems to rap about, but then again, it did fit the context of the song, so it was a pretty good verse. The next one was 2 Chainz on State of Emergency, and this was a great, very fitting verse. It was one of 2 Chainz's best verses of his recent years, so no complaints there. The next and final rapping feature was Big Sean on What's Up. It was another great sounding verse from a rapper that has fallen off since his immense popularity in the early 2010s. It was a very solid verse all around, and again, no complaints with Big Sean. The final feature was Marshmello on Every Day. He brought a very radio sounding beat. It fit the lyrics and context of Logic's bars, I guess. It was, a good feature, if it can really be called a feature. So all in all, we're going to give features a SkeenScore of 8 out of 10. And now for the highlights of the album. 44 More was the lead single, and while it wasn't very akin to 44 Bars, it was a good track. I wish it had been a little bit more like 44 Bars, where Logic talked about his life, but instead he more just wanted to flex a little bit, so that's fine. It was a good track. Midnight was probably my favorite song on the album. It had some of Logic's best bars in the entire album, if you can ignore his repeated reminding of his marriage. It's almost like a love child of City of Stars from The Incredible True Story and Slave 1 and 2 from Bobby Tarantino 1, so it really worked. State of Emergency had the best feature. 2 Chainz had that great verse, and Logic backed it up. The production is the type of beat that could have been found on the first Bobby Tarantino, so it was really good. And the final highlight was Contra. It was a great track with good lyricism and, vanilla flows, but it was a good flex track, so overall the highlights were everything we could have expected. Ring, like ring, 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 ring. That Kevin. And now for the weakest parts, the lowlights of Bobby Tarantino 2. We're going to start with the introduction track, Grandpa's Spaceship. It was a super weak introduction. It was cringeworthy. Nobody cares about Rick and Morty. I mean, I'm sorry, Bobby, unless you're trying to work for 13-year-olds here. It was stupid. Overnight was the next low light. It has been labeled by the internet as the Super Mario World of Bobby Tarantino 2, but it finds Logic flexing, even though, he doesn't flex. It's almost cringeworthy. He's been rapping since he was 13. He didn't do anything overnight. And the final lowlight isn't exactly a song. It's just his ad-libs in general. His ad-libs don't really work. He's not the Migos. He doesn't pull it off. He uses his own name, Bobby, and preach. It doesn't work. So there were definitely some lowlights to this album. And now for the enjoyment factor, which is basically 100% opinion. This will definitely change from person to person. So for me, the enjoyment factor was lacking. It was a good album with strong aspects, but the weak ones are so obnoxious that it would be difficult to listen to the entire album over and over. An album like this that's just flexing and doesn't really have any substance needs to be something you can legitimately turn up to. I can't picture myself in a car with my friends bumping, Bobby Tarantino 2. I'm going to throw in some Migos or something, not Logic. It's a good album for Logic stans, but the casual rap fan won't really pay any mind to it. I'll return to some of the highlights like Midnight, but not the whole thing. I'm finna tell it like it is. Game in the headlock like Stiz. Everybody know the deal. And second to last, we have the concept. So Bobby Tarantino 2 wasn't a conceptual album, but I would argue that every album has a concept. The concept for Bobby Tarantino 2 being, as Rick said himself in the introduction, to turn some shit up. But nobody in their right mind would bump this album riding in the whip with the squad. It's just not going to happen. So therefore, Bobby Tarantino 2 fails to turn anything up, and the concept for this album essentially fails. So we'd give it a SkeenScore of 0 out of 10, but this will be exempt from the final album rating since this album wasn't meant to really have a concept. You the man right now. You the man right now with the whole wide world in the palm of your hand right now. Fuck the lights and finally, to conclude everything, overall, it wasn't a bad album, but it left a lot to be desired. I want to see Logic go back to the mixtape Logic or one of his first 2 types of albums, Logic, The Incredible True Story, Under Pressure. I'm not liking this post-apocalyptic Logic. He's not living up to his potential. So overall, we're going to give it a SkeenScore of 6.25 out of 10. Alright guys, that'll wrap things up for my review of Bobby Tarantino 2. Don't forget to go to the description and vote for the album that I'll be doing next week. I'm on spring break now, so I should be able to make a few more videos, maybe, try to shoot for 1 or 2 a week, but subscribe so you don't miss out on those.